Hey everyone, Steve Chu here. Today I'm going to talk about designing teaching for diverse learners. Before we start though, having a handout will really be useful for you. And the handout can be found at the link that is listed here on the screen. So if you want to take a minute to download that handout, to have it handy, that would be really, I think, helpful to you. So let's talk a little bit about teaching for diverse learners. I'm going to first talk about the general principles of learning and how we can use those to adapt to different learning situations. And then at the end, I'm going to talk specifically about diversity and inclusion, about principles that we should pay close attention to make our teaching and learning as inclusive as possible towards like first-generation college students or marginalized groups. But first, let's just talk about the general principles of learning. There's a lot of uncertainty right now about how we'll be learning or how we'll be teaching this semester, but the important thing to understand is that learning only takes place in one location, and that's in the brain, and the brain learns according to general principles. If you understand those general principles, you can adapt your learning to whatever situation you might find yourself in. So we're going to start with talking about the general principles of learning, but everyone has unique life experiences, so every learner is unique in certain ways. They have vastly different life experiences. So in that way, using these general principles, learners come into our classes with different levels of motivation, different levels of prior knowledge or misconceptions, different attitudes towards our course and our topics. So in order to teach effectively, we have to understand both the general principles of learning. We have to understand how to identify where students are in their learning, and to adapt our pedagogy to create the optimal learning experience for them so we can teach everyone. Okay, I'm going to start with a metaphor here and something that maybe you did during the quarantine, and that's baking bread. This was posted by a friend of mine, and she was trying sourdough for the first time, and so she created a sourdough starter, and it overflowed, and she posted frantically on Facebook, sourdough starter, fail or success, what's happened here? Something unexpected has happened, and she couldn't really understand whether it was a good thing or a bad thing. So this really highlights the difference between practices versus principles. So in practice, you have steps you go through that you follow, which hopefully will lead to a good result, and it may lead to a good result, but if something unexpected happens, if something goes wrong, then you have no way of interpreting what went wrong. Was it good or is it bad? Is it something that I need to correct, or is it something that I should really be happy about? And that's where principles come in. If you understand the principles of baking bread, if you understand yeast and gluten and carbon dioxide, then you can interpret what's going on. So much is the same about teaching. A lot of times, faculty think about practices of teaching and not the principles of learning. If you follow practices, then something goes wrong or something unexpected happens, then you may not know how to respond to that. You may not know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. If you understand principles, though, the general principles of learning, you can create practices that are consistent with the principles. You can interpret what's going on, whether it's good or bad. If it's bad, you can also design ways of addressing that issue, things that you can't do with simple practices. So when I see things like best practices and checklists of like what you should do in order to teach effectively, I think those checklists are handy and they're useful as guides, but really what's going to be important is for you to understand the principles underlying those guidelines. You can't just simply use the best practice and it'll always work. Teaching is far too complex for that to happen. You can't checklist your way to effective teaching, but you can use principles to design and adapt your teaching to reach as many learners as possible. And that's really the goal of teaching, not just to teach those students who are highly motivated and highly prepared, but to reach those students who are ambivalent about your class, who come into the class not knowing if it'll be valuable to them, not knowing how difficult it will be, and capturing those students and helping them to learn. That's really the kind of optimal learning that I'm talking about. All right, now As I said, learning is both universal and idiosyncratic. And instead of having a list of things to do, a list of best practices, or a list of principles that you should follow, what I have here are cognitive challenges. Right? So in order to teach effectively, you've got to solve each of these challenges. So students come into our classes at different levels of each of these challenges, and you need to figure out ways of solving these challenges for as many students as possible. Right? And the way you solve the challenges will depend on each class. So each class is unique. You know that what worked really great, that activity that worked really great at the 8 o'clock section of a class may fall flat at the 9 o'clock section, because each class has their own character and is in different places in terms of the cognitive challenges to teaching. So thinking about challenges allows us to be more flexible and adaptive in our pedagogy, rather than just simply sticking to certain best practices and thinking they should work no matter what. So there are the 9 practices, the 9 challenges, and they are listed on your handout. We're going to go through each one. I'm going to talk about the problem, and I'm going to talk about ways to address that problem. Now, some of these you may not have seen before, you've never even considered, and if that's the case, then that can mean one of several things. Number one, your knowledge about the principles of learning may be incomplete, and this may be a factor that you should take into account that you perhaps have not taken into account before. One of the things that is obvious from a 9 challenge framework for teaching is that teaching is much more complex than a lot of faculty think. So you may not have been taking these factors seriously, and you really need to, because any one of these factors can undermine teaching effectiveness. And you may go for years without that factor being important, and all of a sudden it comes into play, and it may affect your success in teaching. Another thing that might happen is that intuitively you understand these challenges, and you have already addressed them intuitively. So for a lot of teachers, their teaching is intuitive. They don't really think about it. They just simply follow their intuition, their gut instinct. And sometimes the gut instinct can be correct, and teaching can be very effective. Other times it can be incorrect, and your teaching may be suboptimal. Then the third thing that may happen is that the challenge may not be that critical in the context in which you teach. So the students you see and the kind of environment you teach in, that factor may not come into play, so it may not be something you've ever seen before. So think about that as we go through each of these challenges. We're going to start with student mental mindset. Student mental mindset has to do with the attitudes and beliefs that students hold towards a course or a topic. So for example, how hard should I have to work in order to do well in this course? How valuable will this course be to me? How motivated am I to work towards this course? Do I like this topic, or do I fear this topic? Those are all kind of aspects of mental mindset. So here in each of these scenarios, I have a scenario how this might play out in the actual classroom. And then on your handout, I have an explanation of how it might also undermine your learning, the student learning. So this is one in the survey that we did. You find that a lot of teachers have seen, and a lot of teachers think is very serious. So the way to interpret this graph, the blue bars are whether faculty have seen them before, and so the B is seen it on occasion, and C is seen it frequently. So I've got almost 90%, I think, of faculty who have seen this at least on occasion, and then I've got about over 80% thinking that this is at least a minor problem or a major problem. Now, if you teach advanced courses, you may not see this, because by the time students get to advanced courses, then they are already inherently interested in your topic. Where you see this is introductory courses, especially general education courses, which students are taking because it's a requirement for them. So I teach statistics. Those of us who teach math type courses see this. Science courses, you see this. Writing courses, you see this. You may have heard of growth versus fixed mindset. The idea of a fixed mindset is that students think they're just inherently good or bad at something. We see this in math all the time, where students think they're not good at math, and so therefore they don't put forth the effort because they think that you only have a certain fixed amount of math ability, and that's not changeable through their own effort. So what we need to do is promote a growth mindset, which says that your learning is a direct result of your own effort and your own level of practice and study. And so the growth mindset is much more constructive in terms of getting students to work hard and to succeed at a course. So the good news here is that there's some really very effective interventions for creating a growth mindset, a positive mindset, but it's something that you can work on in the first day. The first day class, you need to establish why your class is important, why it's of value to students. We tend to overlook this because, of course, we've devoted our lives to our subjects, but students are coming in for a variety of reasons, and you need to emphasize why they should pay attention to this course, what its value is for them. Okay, the next one is metacognition and self-regulation. Metacognition has to do with the student's awareness of their own level of understanding. So students monitor how well they understand a topic, and when they think they've understood it well enough, they'll stop studying. Well, a lot of students tend to be overconfident, and that means that they don't start studying until it's too late, and then they stop studying too soon, and the overconfidence leads to really poor performance and poor self-regulation of learning. Okay, and this is also a big factor. As you can see, I've got a very large percentage, more than 90%, who've seen this before, at least on occasion, and think it's a real problem. So even in professional schools like law school, pharmacy school, and you will see this kind of overconfidence. And part of the reason for this is because students transition from one environment to another. They bring the old habits they have with them, which have been effective in their prior learning environment, like high school to college or undergraduate to law school, and they simply are poor at recognizing when they've mastered knowledge in this new context. So they tend to be overconfident about this. The way to address this is to use formative assessment, to give students opportunities to assess their understanding, assess their knowledge, and that will give both the students and you feedback about their level of understanding. Now, just giving students feedback isn't enough, because a lot of times students don't know how to use that feedback. You need to create a way of forcing them to pay attention to that feedback, to diagnose what they know and what they don't know. So you need to help them to understand what that feedback says. If you do poorly on this kind of activity, then you can't expect to do well on the exam. So you have to use that feedback to identify what you have mastered and what you need to pay more attention to. Student fear and mistrust. This is a factor which a lot of teachers are not aware of, that students have to have a sense of trust in both the teacher and in the institution that they're in. So a lot of students have a lot of fear about the professor. They believe that the professor is trying to the professor is trying to winnow out the weak students, and so they take any criticism from the professor very personally. They see it as an attack on their competence, not as a means of trying to get students to do better. This is especially true, by the way, in marginalized students and minority students and first-generation students. They don't really know how to deal with this kind of critical feedback. No matter how constructive it is, they're already feeling like they don't necessarily belong, and so they take this as a personal criticism and a statement that you really don't belong here. Now, what's interesting about this is that in our survey of how often teachers see this, you see that actually only a small percentage of students, or a small percentage of faculty have seen this very frequently. And the reason for this is that if the students don't trust you, they're not going to come and see you. These are the students who, they just kind of stop coming to class. You ask them to come see you, and they don't. Maybe if they finally do see you, it's like towards the end of the semester. But if you work in like the Academic Success Center, you see these kinds of students. They're just convinced that they don't belong, they can't make it, and they're not wanting to persevere and continue. But if you develop trust, develop the sense that you're going to treat them fairly, you're not discriminating against them, that you are committed to their success, then this can have a huge impact on their perseverance and their motivation, their willingness to work hard for you. Let me give you an example of this. One way of building student trust is through what's called wise feedback. So here we have two different ways of providing feedback on a paper. So the student makes an F, and you just write, "Please see me." Okay. Now compare that to this message on a paper that a student fails. Your paper contains a number of errors that are easily correctable. I can see you using some inefficient strategies to solve some of these problems. Come by my office and let me go over this with you. I think it can really help you with this. So this kind of feedback builds trust, and it makes it much more likely that the students will come in and see you and seek out that help. So this is wise feedback, and wise feedback consists of a number of different elements. It consists of making it very clear that this criticism is coming because you are holding the whole class to high standards and you're treating everyone the same. So you have integrity, you're treating everyone fairly, you're not singling anybody out. It indicates that you believe that the student is capable of good work with sufficient effort, and it signals that you are willing to provide the resources and the help for the students to achieve this. So these three properties are really valuable in terms of building trust, especially among minority and first-generation students. Okay. The next one is prior knowledge, and this is probably it is the single most influential factor in how students will do in your class. Students come into our courses with different levels of prior knowledge, and students who have a greater prior knowledge in a topic have a huge advantage over those students who are seeing the material for the first time. So we see this often in undergraduate classes, and by the way, you can look at the survey results. You can see that a lot of faculty have seen this at least on occasion or frequently, and they think it's at least a minor problem or a major problem. These are results for Samford University as a whole. If you look at undergraduate only instructors, these numbers go up to about 60 to 80%. So you see this in introductory classes. Students are taking a course where some of the students have had good courses in high school and some have not. So calculus, history, psychology, sociology. Some high schools, the more affluent high schools, have very strong high school programs, and others do not. In Alabama, this is especially a problem because the quality of high schools varies so greatly from the highly affluent school systems to the really, really poor ones. So students coming into an introductory class, for some students it's a review, for other students it is the first time they've ever seen anything like this, and those students are at a huge disadvantage. As a matter of fact, research shows that a lot of times the best students in a course have really not learned anything new. They're just simply repeating things they've learned previously, and they're competing against students for whom this is brand new. The way to address this is actually in a two-pronged approach. Number one, we can use technology to create supplemental instruction, going through examples, explaining principles clearly, modeling how we think about problems, about how we identify what kind of problem it is, or what kind of category of let's say literature that this might be, and then how to like work our way through that kind of literature or this kind of particular problem. So really modeling our thought processes for them and how to solve this kind of problem. And that way students have access to the extra instruction they might need. The other way of addressing this is through improving their learning strategies, which I'll talk about a little bit later. Okay. Right. The next challenge is misconceptions. This is the flip side of prior knowledge. Prior knowledge is a combination of accurate information and inaccurate information, and sometimes the inaccurate information is more damaging to learning than the accurate information, because misconceptions, by the time students get to us, is very reinforced, and it's very tenacious, and it may be very hard to change. So misconceptions tend to be really, really hard to correct. As a matter of fact, the research on this is quite pessimistic, it's quite pessimistic about your ability to change strongly held misconceptions, especially those misconceptions are tied up with personal values. Those are really, really hard to change. So if you can correct them, there's a good chance that the students will revert back to the original misconceptions after your course is over. Really what you need to do is to be very specific about addressing these misconceptions, and then at a curricular level, make sure these misconceptions are addressed in multiple courses so that the students understand the correct information, and you build the strength of that correct information so that students will understand why this is a misconception and prefer the more correct information. As a matter of fact, there's so many misconceptions in general psychology that there's actually a proposal that general psychology should be centered around common misconceptions, because they are so strong. We have left brain, right brain, people use only 10% of your brain, people have a preferred learning style. All of these are misconceptions that people have that are really, really hard to change. But there are ways of addressing misconceptions. I'd be happy to give you resources for that if you need. All right. The next one is ineffective learning strategies, and this is a huge problem, and you can see that the faculty overwhelmingly identified this as a huge problem. Students tend to use really ineffective learning strategies, and this is actually based on a misconception that they have about learning. Students tend to think that all learning strategies are about the same, and really what's really critical is the amount of study that you practice, that you do. So if you ask students how well prepared are you, they'll almost always give you an answer in terms of time. Well, I've been studying for the last several days on this, or I spent hours on this. But what's really critical is not time, which is necessary or not sufficient. It's the quality of the learning strategy that really matters. If you use an ineffective learning strategy, you're going to study long and hard, but you're not really going to learn very much. If you use a effective learning strategy, it's going to be much more challenging and difficult, but it's going to be the most effective way of leading to long-term learning. Now, good effective learning strategies are difficult, but not all difficult learning strategies are effective. So you have to learn the best ways of learning. Virtually all good learning strategies involve meaning analysis, understanding information, the meaning and the implications, the meaningful associations between a concept and other concepts, also the distinctions between one concept and other kinds of concepts. So there's a number of resources. I have a number of videos on how to study effectively that you can use to help students to study more effectively. But you can also model these learning strategies in your own classes. So for example, you can have retrieval practice sessions. Retrieval practice, just practicing retrieving and using information, is a very effective way of studying. So especially if there's a delay between when students learn and when they later have to practice it. So let's say they learn a concept 1 week, and then the next week, just out of the blue, like I've called this Throwback Thursday strategy, you just say, well, here's a problem, or here's an example that we've seen before, who recognizes it? How are we going to get through this kind of thing? So it forces students to think back of something they've had before and recall that information and apply that information, and tell them this is an effective way of studying. You should space out your studying. You should close your book and notes and not just reread information, which is the most common study strategy, and it's very ineffective for long-term learning. And just practice recalling and using information, and get them on the road to developing more effective study strategies. Then comes transfer of learning. We tend to take transfer for granted, that once students have learned information in one context, they'll naturally generalize it to other contexts. We think that's true because we've been studying our fields for years and years, and of course we think in general terms, but actually all new learning is context specific. It's true only in the very specific context in which you learn it. So students learn a concept in your class. As far as they're concerned, it's only true in your class. So if they learn something that's contradictory in another class, then that's fine with them, because what they've learned in your class is true for your class, and what they've learned in another class is true for that class. And so they don't really make that connection oftentimes between how they can hold two contradictory beliefs in different classes. So transfer is kind of the gold ring of learning. It's the gold standard. You want students to transfer their learning, but decades of research show that transfer is very hard to achieve, and you have to foster transfer. You've got to start with the context in which you're learning, and you need to scaffold, or you need to promote transfer to different situations. So when you teach a concept, you need to identify the critical situations where you want students to apply that concept, and you need to teach them how to transfer that concept. So transfer is not automatic. It's something that you need to promote, and you can see that the survey shows that a vast majority of faculty recognize that transfer is a critical problem. If you've not seen this as a problem, chances are you've never checked for it. And as a matter of fact, there's a whole strategy which I call ambush grading, where you actually don't teach them about a certain application and then you spring it on them on the exam because it leads to a really good distribution. Well, the problem is that students may have been capable of making that transfer if you had helped them to understand it, but they have gotten low grades because they failed to make that transfer and you didn't teach it to them. So the next one is constraints on selective attention. I'm sure if you've heard talks I've given before, you know that we are not geared towards multitasking. Our attention is a very limited focus. Anything that happens outside of that focus we're unaware of. We don't realize what's happening outside of our focus awareness. And anything that pulls our attention or tries to divide our attention really hurts learning. So this is something I emphasize to students every time I talk to them, that you've got to be fully present in your learning. And you can ask your students to, you can warn them about this, and you can say, as you're studying, as you're viewing the class videos, try and look at it with full focus. Don't just, listen through headphones as you're doing other things, because, that's really going to undermine your learning. The key thing here is not to create distractions on your own. So don't create distractions in your classroom by having multiple sources of information. So you're talking while information is up on the PowerPoint, and so you're actually dividing the student attention. A big part of effective learning is attention management, knowing where the student's attention is, giving them only one level of focus or one area of focus of their attention. And if you lose their attention, just take a break and gather that attention back, because that's really going to be the most effective thing to do in the long run. You may notice that my slides are pretty bare bones, and that's intentional. I don't want to have clip arts and things like that might draw their attention away from what it is they're supposed to be attending to. Okay. The last one is constraints of mental effort and working memory. Mental effort is concentration, our ability to concentrate and focus. And that level of concentration and focus is limited. We only have a certain amount that's available to us. It tends to fluctuate throughout the day. When we're well rested, we have a greater amount of concentration available to us than when we're tired, but there's always an upper limit. If you try to do too many different things at once, you're going to exceed that limit and you're going to be overwhelmed and your performance is going to suffer. So it's like taking a really hard exam and you're fully focused on the exam, or you're doing some really critical task, and then there's a distraction. Someone starts tapping their fingers, or there's some sort of noise in the background, and anything that happens that distracts you takes away from that concentration, and it's really incredibly annoying, and for that kind of thing to happen. A lot of faculty are not aware of the limits of concentration. By the way, working memory is our conscious memory when we're consciously thinking about something, and that also is a limit. We have a limited amount of information we can hold in conscious working memory. So you can think about the limitation in terms of concentration or in terms of consciousness. Either way, it's a major limitation on our ability to learn. So it's really intriguing. A lot of faculty pointed this out as a sort of a moderate issue. Fewer faculty pointed this out as a very frequent problem, or a problem which was a major issue. And that may reflect the curse of expertise. The curse of expertise is a major problem for college teachers. It is due to the fact that we have been studying our topics for years, if not decades. And for us, it is easy and automatic. And we have forgotten what it's like to learn information for the first time. So as a result of this, we tend to be really poor at judging how much information the students need to get in order to understand a concept. We tend to give them too little information so that they don't really understand a concept very well. And we also tend to underestimate how long it takes them to master a concept. We think they should master it faster than they really can, because we've forgotten what it was like when we learned information for the first time. So we tend to look down on students. We think, well, they're just, they must have been gotten a weak education before they got here, or they were mollycoddled, when in fact it's our problem. It's the curse of expertise. Now, this is critically important for us to understand also in this environment we're in this semester, because it's a challenge initially, because in any circumstances, because students aren't just learning in our class, they're learning in 3 or 4 other classes, and they're having to get used to how each professor teaches, with their expectations, how they're going to test and things like that. So that's challenging enough. But here, in this semester, we have to worry about the technology, the course delivery, and you have the added concerns about where we're going to live, keeping safe during the pandemic. There are a huge number of distractions that take away from our ability to concentrate, and so it's easy to overwhelm students. Their available mental effort. And if they're overwhelmed, they're not going to learn. The curse of expertise is one reason. There's another common reason, that's a misconception that faculty have, that student struggle is good for learning. So the more students struggle, then that's a good thing, and the more they'll learn. No, the more students struggle, the more they struggle. They are not necessarily going to learn anything, and it is easy to overwhelm students, especially with new learning. Okay, so those are the 9 challenges that we have to deal with for effective teaching. So it involves application of principles to your situation. So effective teaching is basically designing pedagogy that you think will be effective, assessing it, and then adapting it. Just keep in mind that all learning is context dependent, and you need to promote transfer, and you need to teach more about than content. Okay, effective teaching is also about teaching students how to think and learn about the context. Now I want to talk specifically about how we can help learners, especially those from first-generation families and those from marginalized groups. I've already alluded about to this as I went through the challenges, but I want to spend more time talking about two specific aspects or challenges that are especially critical for dealing with marginalized students and with first-generation students, and that's student mental mindset and student fear and mistrust. So here are the 4 factors which I think you have to really pay attention to here. Belongingness. We have to develop a sense of belongingness, a feeling of membership and acceptance within the community. This is true within the classroom. It's also true within the institution as well. Everyone has to find sort of their place and their people, especially at the very beginning. So they have to feel membership and acceptance within the community. Identity safety is another psychological concept that has to do with mental mindset. It's individuals feel like they are welcomed and supported and valued, whatever their background might be. So whatever they bring to campus, then that is valued, even if it doesn't fit the general prevailing sort of demographic of campus. Something that's important to realize is that any campus favors certain kind of people and disfavors others. So think about the kind of students that are favored at Samford. Who has the easiest time adapting because most everyone here is like them, right? It tends to be people of a certain race. They tend to be white, upper middle class students, well educated, of a certain means, certain experiences. Those are the students who are surrounded by other students who are just like them. And so they feel like they belong, they feel identity safety almost immediately. Whereas students who are first generation, students who are from families who are struggling financially, students from who are minority students in some ways or marginalized in some other way, it's very hard for them to feel that sense of belonging, that identity safety. Okay. The third factor is mattering, in which people feel valued and cared about by others. So especially those who bring a different background to campus, different cultural background. So they need to feel like they are valued for who they are and what they contribute to campus. And the fear of not mattering actually is a major fear that students, especially those who do not fit in with the majority of campus, this is something that gnaws on them, that, will I not matter here? Will people not see me as being important? And it predicts social anxiety, loneliness, and lack of resilience. And I applaud recent efforts to talk about Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and related cases. And so that is starting to show mattering. The problem is that these cases have been around for at least the last decade. And there's never been any sort of announcement or there's never been any sort of valuing up to that point. So I remember vividly back in 2014, one of my African-American students, an African-American male, explained to me that he skipped my class. He was very sorry about it because the Black Student Union was having a protest for a police shooting on campus. It was, of course, only the Black Student Union who was participating. It got no sort of notice or and by any of the other by a lot of other students or by the administration. And he wanted to let me know that he thought that was really important to him. And of course, that's your priority. He feared for his life. And so I, said, I'm not here to set your life priorities. You have to do what you think is absolutely best. So the fact that we have not cared up until this point really works against us as an institution. Then the last one is trust, which I talked about as a separate challenge. The willingness to risk vulnerability, willingness to be on Samford's campus in the belief that the teachers here are competent, will demonstrate that should be integrity, and will act in ways that are beneficial to the student's learning and development. It's called beneficence, where they'll act in ways that are beneficial and helpful to the students, that we are committed to their success. So there's trust for faculty, and there's also trust for the institution. And I think there's been a certain level of trust among at least certain faculty that has been in existence, which has really helped a lot of marginalized students to feel like they belong here. I think the trust in the institution is where we really need to focus our attention, and it was great to see some of the initiatives that Denise is rolling out, and of course all of her efforts in the past. I really applaud that and support that effort. All right. So this sense of belonging and identity safety can be really quite subtle, and it really struck me in the syllabus guidelines that we were issued about how you can make someone not belong feel like they don't belong very easily. So this was a required statement in our syllabus. So students' responsibility to have access to the internet, to course textbooks, show the following technology available, webcam software, and so forth. It's easy to say, but we have to recognize that a lot of students are going through financial difficulties now. We're going through a huge financial downturn. A lot of families are facing financial instability, and even in the best of circumstances, a lot of students don't have good internet access. So what this statement does, it just says, in order to be a part of this community, you've got to have this technology. If you don't have this, you can't get this, then you don't belong here. The syllabus is our first contact with students, and it should be inviting and it should be supportive. It should not be a cold statement of either you're a part of us or you're not. So Dave Johnson in biology, after my talk this morning, modified the statement in this way to make it more inviting. So these are the expectations. If you have difficulty purchasing, acquiring necessary items, let me know, and I'll do all I can to help you work it out. So it is inclusive, it is supportive, it builds trust, right? It builds a sense of you are, all part of this community here. The same is true with our student bereavement policy. In the event the student experiences death of a significant member of the family, of the community, the university may excuse absence of, 5 days for travel and bereavement. The provost's office will notify advisors and instructors of excused absences. So it's a very cold statement. It's like, well, if it's someone really close, maybe we'll give you 5 days. But if it's someone who's like more like a distant relative, maybe we'll give you like 1 day or 2 days. I'm sure it is not intended to make that kind of statement, but it basically does. And then here is Dave Johnson's version of that statement. So in the experience of death of a significant member of his or her family and community, be aware that your Samford community will stand beside you in your loss. It's like, I'm sorry for your loss. We understand we're going through a pandemic. 170,000 people have died. Everyone is affected. And we will help you get through this. We will be compassionate, and we will work with you that you will still be able to learn what you need to do. So this is not excusing. This is not saying we're lowering your standards for you. This is saying that we will help you to achieve learning that you need, and also that you are grieving at this time, and we know that affects you personally. All right. So in building a relationship-rich college education, Peter Felton has sort of said, we need these 3 things, what he calls a relentless welcome, inescapable opportunities for meaningful interactions, and a constellation of mentors, including mentors of the moment. Students will find out, who they need to go talk to, and that person will be helpful to them. And this is, under ideal conditions, this is great. But if a student does not have a sense of belonging, then that relentless welcome and that inescapable opportunities for meaningful interactions is just a constant reminder that they don't belong here, that they are not part of this community. And that's part of the, what Denise talked about, microaggressions and this loss of a sense of belongingness, that the Black at Samford Instagram group is talking about. So in order to make Samford more diverse and inclusive, I would, in terms of successful learning, I would say here are 5 things we need to work on. Promoting belonging, and the easiest way to promote belonging is for students to be able to see their cultural background in the curriculum and to see people like themselves who are in positions of authority or students like themselves who are more advanced to succeed. Promote trust in the faculty, administrators, and institution, creating a web of mentoring and advising, promoting autonomy where students feel like they have a choice, they are in charge of their college experience, affirming their personal value that they matter, and promoting personal competence that they can succeed through their own efforts. So if you are in need of resources for helping students to learn more effectively through these challenges, I've created a 20-minute video that you can use in your courses. This is available at the YouTube link that it's here. Plus I have my original How to Study videos that you're welcome to use. So I appreciate your attention. I hope you found this beneficial, and I wish you the very best in this semester.